Hello, peeps, 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 and more peeps. Ooh-wee. Welcome to the Transparency Q&A from episode number 2. So, give you guys a chance to get in chat, love. Thumbs it up, peeps. Oh yeah, keep it up, Callie. Way to talk about it. Pull that down. What is good? Here we go to the moon and back. Yes, here we go is right. Remember, all questions, this is a follow-up for episode 2, which happened this past Sunday. So, again, going to give people time to get in chat. /on. Doo-doo. This follow-up is priceless though too. So if you guys are like following along with a timeline, you need to get the official timeline, which I'll make sure that you guys have. So I'll print off another one too. Walk you guys through this. Like my hoodie? Thanks, appreciate that. All right. Okay. Shannon, Patty, Kylene, Canadian Mama, all rocking. Beautiful. Did I make it members only for chatting? I don't know if I did or not. I wasn't trying to if I did. Oops. Well, that was weird. Sorry. It booted me. Sorry about that. Something weird happened. Did that just like restart completely? Okie dokie. All right, here we go. Okay, timeline, guys. Everything that you guys would have heard the past 2 episodes from what the police, 3 officers have stated that they just before 8 o'clock were heading up to Linmar. And, you know, the first thing that goes on the timeline is when Officer 9 would have began his shift, which is 3 o'clock. So 3 o'clock is going to be PM, Officer 9, you know, getting to work. Sunset in Aliquippa on March 15, 2001 was 6:28 p.m. was sunset. So that also gets a spot on the lovely timeline, as you guys will see here. I'll zoom you guys in on this lovely timeline, which we're going to break down. So in episode 2, we had our supposed quote unquote first sighting, okay, of Officer Nime, and that would have been the gentlemen that were coming back in the van that locked their car, the keys in the van. So a couple of things I went ahead and did. And in the interviews, they claimed that at approximately 8 o'clock was when he knocked on the door, and then Officer Nime opened it up, and they had a conversation when he then said, we don't do that anymore. We cannot, due to liability concerns, we can't pop locks anymore. And this interview was done on 5/10. So the murder was 3:15. So this interview takes place almost 2 months, after the murder, with this gentleman, James. Okay, so James is stating, so what I went ahead and did is I put on the timeline 8 o'clock based on James. Then, he was there there was 3 other people, of which I wanted to know more about where the gentleman was coming from that actually owned the van, because his friends were using it. And that would be, he was coming from Bridgewater. So Bridgewater is 17 minutes, okay? So it's a 17-minute drive for the gentleman that actually owned the van when he got the call to get in his vehicle, drive then to Linn-Mar, 17 minutes. So if he was called at 8 o'clock, that means that this gentleman would have been arriving in Linn-Mar at 8:17 p.m. Now, so what I went ahead and did is I just put down 8:17 with a question mark, because I went back and looked at a couple things. Now, one of those things being the crime scene log. 8:20, 8:25, 8:25, 8:26, okay? So if they're having persons entering the crime scene at 8:20, when this gentleman would have been driving from Bridgewater and arriving in Linn-Mar at supposedly around 8:17, that's 3 minutes away from the time of officers being up there in Linn-Mar, because they were all called in on radio traffic saying, not only is this at the point that, officer down, but, calling all units and stuff like that. So I started thinking about the fact that, well, let's actually read his statement again. We're going to be putting this on a timeline, because I looked over the police statements, and they said that they went to the substation just a little bit before 8 o'clock. First you had Roberts that did it, as well as, first you had Cassidy and Young, and then Roberts. They're in 2 separate different vehicles, cop vehicles, one of which is an unmarked vehicle, which is Roberts' vehicle is unmarked. And then you have this gentleman that got the keys locked in the van that walks just a couple buildings down to where the substation was, knocks on the door, which he then says that it was Officer Nime that opened it, because that's what it is written in the report. And that happened at 8 o'clock. Well, immediately when I saw that, I said, well, that's interesting, because none of the police officers just before 8 claimed that they blew the air horn, they radioed him, and they couldn't get in touch with him. They radioed him, they blew the air horn. That's what Young and Cassidy said. Robert said when he went up there, he had pulled up. When he went in to check that the door was locked, then he went in, he wasn't in there, and then he left, okay? And in both of these reports, they're claiming that this happened just before 8 o'clock. But in Robert's report, he's saying that when he left Franklin Avenue at the police department, in his report, it says that as he was about to get in his vehicle, because he was going to go get coffee, is when he heard the report go out, shots fired in Linn-Mar. Okay? So if Officer Roberts is the one that heard over the radio shots fired in Linn-Mar, that would mean that Officer Roberts isn't the person that announced that, over. So you have Officer Robertson getting in his vehicle and driving up to Linn-Mar, because also what Officer Roberts said is that not only did he get the radio in about shots fired, but that it was radioed in that they couldn't find the victim, meaning what they're saying, but they couldn't find him. When they radioed him, he wasn't responding via radio to radio. Like 5:15, this is 5:40, over. Yep, 5:40 here, what kind of, that type of communication. So going back to the van, how could the guy that locked his keys in the car go to the substation and Nimes there? And he repeats, he says, yeah, he was there. He partially opened up the door, though he didn't open it all the way. Okay. Interesting. But he is saying that at 8 o'clock is when he went down there to talk to him. Now, this was also an interview that took place 2 months to then there was another one that happened in August. So you have all of March, half of March, April, May, June, July. So like 5.5 months later when this interview was in May, but then there's another one that takes place in August. But here's the May one. And I'm going off of his handwritten report. According to James, he said, I was called at approximately 8 p.m. He was called. He was in Bridgewater, gets the phone call, and told that an employee had locked the keys in his van in Linn-Mar. He then contacted, it's Hyman Auto Service. It's in Aliquippa. It is a 5-minute drive from Linn-Mar to the service. He called them up by phone from Bridgewater and then proceeded, after he called, he then proceeded to Linn-Mar to meet his buddies, his employer, and to get in his vehicle. He said that he had money to pay the serviceman, and that upon arrival, though, this is where it gets interesting. Upon arrival, he said, I saw one Aliquippa marked police car backed into the driveway beside the police substation, and a second marked Aliquippa police car was parked on the street, engine running and headlights on. Okay. So what that means is that the car that would be backed up on the side, that's going to be Officer Nimes' vehicle that was parked up on the side. Then the vehicle that would be pulled up, that's a marked vehicle, that's going to be because remember, Roberts is in an unmarked vehicle. And this guy is claiming, when he's writing this, that they were 2 Aliquippa police vehicles. So then that would mean it would be Sean Young and Cassidy's, because those are the 2 marked vehicles. But The unmarked was Roberts. So this guy is saying that approximately which would be if he really left at 8 o'clock, it would take him 17 minutes to get to Linn-Mar. So at 8:17, he's pulling in. And when he's pulling in, he sees the 2 cop vehicles at the substation, which I'm going to show you what this guy did. He comes up this hill. Okay. Right here, you're going to be making a right. This is your community building right here. Basketball courts are behind it. Okay. Right here is your substation. Where he was headed was right here, was where the vehicle was parked. But this is like a one-way. Like, in order to come, you'd have to go around like this, technically. Because this is like, it's like a one-way. When you hear people say that they came up the hill, they made a right into Linn-Mar, and they went down the one-way, people were doing this type of stuff and going the wrong way. They've done it over here too, back when it was, when you're pulling in over here as well. But this is where your substation is, okay? Back in this building right over here. So you park, these are little parking spots here, okay? And then these are just the doors. But your vehicle's gonna be parked right over here. And then here's your substation. Basketball courts over here. The Linn-Mar community building's here. And then when you walk down here, that's gonna be where your Linn-Mar market is. And it's a pretty decent walk. So, gentleman says he comes up the hill, he sees 2 police vehicles, one of which is backed in, the other one, everything's running. Interesting that he's noting this, but okay. So, and then it would have taken him 17 minutes. Upon when he gets there, he is then, I want to read it straight from his words. When he gets there, he proceeded to his parked van and then had to wait on the service guy. I saw no police officers to this point. He didn't see a police officer. While waiting for the guy, an unmarked older police vehicle drove past us, stopped, and the police officer didn't say anything to him, but he just simply told the police officer why he was there, and the police officer said nothing back to him and then just left. No words when he pulled up. He's explaining what he's doing there, and the police officer doesn't say anything, and he just drives off. And that the 2 guys that were there that had called this man, Rich, stated that prior to the officer driving past and him arriving, they had just heard 5 gunshots prior to the guy coming from Bridgewater, prior to his arrival, that they had just heard 5 gunshots. Now, then he states that the guy gets there to pop the lock and mentions that it happened quickly. He was able to open the van quickly, and the service guy, him, Rich, and they all left and went to Bridgewater. Now, so you got to ask yourselves, all right, well, obviously that was Roberts in the unmarked vehicle, right? Well, what's Roberts say he did exactly when he came up there? Because remember, they're saying that everybody got up there right before 8. This is their statements. What Roberts says he does first is that when he arrives, he goes, birds, that he arrived in Linn-Mar and made a right, like I showed you guys on that sheet. I'll try to do it like this for you guys. So that he's coming up. Robert says he comes up. He makes a right. Okay. And that he made a right going the wrong way on the circle and slowly drove around to the area of the substation. He carefully looked for the victim, hoping that he could see him walking his rounds. He could not locate the victim. He then went directly to the substation. Now, so he comes up, he goes the wrong way, couldn't find him walking his rounds, he's saying. Then he went directly to the substation. Okay, he's saying this has just happened just before 8 o'clock. Okay, and then Robert's saying that he then goes inside the substation. Okay. He advises that he found the door locked. He opened it. Again, he went inside and called for the victim. Again, he could not locate the victim. So he then left out of that office. Then he advised that after he had his little talk with Tiki about not being disrespectful to the grandmother, that he got in his car and then he went to check the 500 block. So what that means is that Officer Roberts, okay, is going to leave and then go check. Now, if he would have pulled out this way, and all of this is the 500 block. So that he pulls down here, and then he's going to enter in here, and this is the 500 block down through here. Now, interesting, in Cassidy's report, or it was actually Young's report, because what I was trying to get to the bottom of when I was doing this is this timing. Because at first, if you go off of the timestamp of at 8 o'clock, if Rich, when he walks down, knocks on the door and Naim is there and he knows who Officer Naim is and he talked to him, there's a sighting of Officer Naim and he is alive at 8 o'clock. Well, then my question is how come when the police officers got up there just before 8 o'clock, okay, how come they didn't see him? And they said that they were there at 8. Also, Robert says in his report that he actually heard shots fired and that Cassidy and Young couldn't locate Officer Naim. So and he's hearing this over the radio because he is just walking in out of the police station down on Franklin to get into his vehicle. And then when he heard that they couldn't be located is when Officer Roberts decides, okay, I'm going to go up there. Which, guys, is just a couple minute drive. So you got Roberts, supposedly Naim's up there. Then you got Cassidy, Young, they're in the same vehicle. And then you have Hines saying that Sonia Carter was there between 7:15 and 7:45. So you had all these police officers in this same area at the same time, but yet nobody's mentioned that they run into each other. They don't talk about, oh, I saw this person, that person, except right here when Young says that when Cassie and Young were up there, they never said they got out of the vehicle. They said they went to the substation and they blew the air horn. Naim didn't come out. They never tried to go in to the substation inside. They radioed him. They blew the air horn. They couldn't locate him right there. And as they made that loop, they saw a juvenile male that approached them and said shots were fired from the cemetery. And that's what then took them way away from everything, supposedly, up to the cemetery, which I'll show you guys how far away that is. And they were saying that right here, we were told by this male juvenile, he heard gunshots in the area of the cemetery. We then proceeded to check the cemetery and alert other units via radio of the situation, which would then be the alerting of, if you think about it, are you alerting that the shots had been fired at that point? Because at this point, then he says, Sergeant Roberts was checking the 500 block of Linn-Mar at this time. That's very descriptive right there, that you knew at the point that you were at the cemetery, going to the cemetery, what Roberts then radioed into you back and said, I'm going to go check the 500 block then. That's what I would think would happen. Okay, so then if we go back, you have to look at now, all right, so if Robert says that he did something in a certain order, which would be going to the substation first, well, actually making a loop, going to the substation, him not being in there, then getting back in his vehicle. That's when he saw Tiki, said, stop being disrespectful to your grandma, gets back in his vehicle, then proceeds to go to the 500 block. At the point that he's going to the 500 block, Cassidy and Young are going to the cemetery, which is because they claim that a juvenile male told them that shots were coming from the cemetery. There is not one report where anybody that's a juvenile, male or female, says that shots were coming from the cemetery. Nothing, for the record. So what the gentleman in the van says, remember, you have to think what he saw. And he's saying that he saw, when he pulls up at 8:17, it takes 17 minutes to get there. We're just gonna say that he got the phone call at 8. He said, okay, I'm gonna call the guy. I'm gonna be leaving Bridgewater. And so he's headed his way to Linn-Mar. It takes 17 minutes to get there, give or take some time, add, subtract. But then the order that he then says, if he sees a car, 2 cars parked outside or out front of the substation, when he gets up there, but then Roberts is doing his drive around. But then remember, when he first got up there, that's when the guys said, oh, right before you got here, we had just heard gunshots. And then Officer Roberts, because he's in that unmarked, drives around. And then Cassidy and Young's vehicle was actually the vehicle that would have been outside of the substation. Unless that was Sonia Carter's, who said that she was there between 7:15 and 7:45. But that doesn't make sense, because at 8:17, when this gentleman's supposed to be arriving there, within 3 minutes from the point of him entering into Linn-Mar, there's supposed to be a roped off crime scene. So if everybody is following what I'm trying to throw here, I'm just going to make it very, very obvious. These times cannot be possibly correct, because what is being said then is the following, but it can be proven because of what they were doing prior to getting to Linn-Mar. Now let's go to the statement of the guy that actually went down to the substation that said that they saw Officer Nime. If you guys were paying attention to the wording I used in the podcast, pre-recorded, I said, how did this person know that it was actually Officer Nime that they had talked to? Everybody's going with the time of death or with the whole shots fired and everything like that. I mean, that could be who in a sense heard that over the radio. What time were people arriving? Was it really Nime? So let's go back to what this gentleman said. And he is saying that they were leaving the UPMC in Aliquippa, which is a 7-minute drive to Linn-Mar. And he claims that between 7 and 7:30 is when they were picked up at UPMC. It's like a hospital treatment facility. They were picked up, Gordon and a guy named Dan, and that they drove directly back to their apartment. And as soon as they exited the vehicle, they realized that they left the keys in the car. And at that point, that's when they had walked down to the substation at approximately 8 o'clock and knocked on the door. Officer Nime answered the door. Now, again, I strongly now, this whole approximately at 8 o'clock. That's when Officer Nime said that the keys, that they couldn't do anything for that anymore. They don't, because of liabilities. Then he says that he just has to walk, because it's just, you guys saw just a couple buildings over. They're all close together. Then he walks back to where the van was, explains to the guys they don't do that anymore. He stated that when he walked back to his apartment, that they then telephoned the owner of the van, James. Then James in turn telephoned the tow company, and then for everyone to then respond. So James was going to be coming from Bridgewater 17 minutes. Then he continued by saying that approximately 15 minutes after talking to Officer Nime, he heard approximately 6 gunshots while standing outside of his apartment. A few minutes later is when a guy from Bridgewater's coming there to meet the service towing guy. And he is in a Bridgewater Fire Department truck. He arrives, and then the tow truck operator arrives. They were explaining that when the guy from Bridgewater shows up, hey, just a couple minutes before you got here, we just heard a bunch of gunshots. He then also explains that a bunch of kids were running. He saw a bunch of kids running. He advised that there was a young black female, approximately 14 to 16 years of age, who was sitting in the middle of the road screaming, "Oh my God," immediately after the shooting. He did not know the female, nor did he recognize her as one of the residents of Linn-Mar. So, again, this was at 294, and I'm going to show you guys something at 293 and 291, and we're going to talk about the proximity of where the officer was when he was found. But I kept going back through my head, and I'm like, this is impossible. This is impossible because these gentlemen, when they left, they said that they didn't see anything. There wasn't a bunch of cops coming up there, a bunch of sirens, people arriving because they're getting caught in the tail end of, everything would be, you would think, ensuing here at 8:20 if there's already, you have a crime scene log and all these people are starting to log in at 8:20, 8:25, 8:26. So the question is, I wonder if they still have those discharge papers of the couple that left treatment, to see what time they actually left. working on that. There we go, burning my paperwork over there. And here we go. And I noticed that this happened, that these reports were coming in at 5, you know, that those 2 months later, 5/11 and 5/15. And that on 5/21 is when Tesla and Linda Barr got together with all the police officers and said, we need to make sure that we have our stuff in. If that's exactly how that went down, not sure. So let's break this down, and I'll flip you guys around here. Sunset goes down at 6:28 p.m. At 7:30, the van is leaving the hospital, the doctor's office, whatever you want to call it, and arriving back then in Linn-Mar. At this time, Sonia Carter would be at the substation between 7:15 and 7:45, at the same time that essentially that the van would be coming back, depending on what they said. They put that they got picked up between 7 and 7:30. Like I said, it's a 7-minute drive, and you have the spotting of Darnell Hines is over there, sitting by the stairs. On the stand, you had Cassidy saying that at 7:45 is when Officer Nime radioed in to come. Like, he was radioing him, and instead of radioing him back, they just said, "Oh, we just went there." Okay. But they're claiming that Officer Nime did this radioing in at 7:45. Then you have Officer right here, Cassidy, Young, and Roberts, all basically there around the same time. That's when your radio went in. And the van would be leaving the hospital. And I moved it up. Your van arriving, van keys getting locked in the car, van driver walking down to the substation. Again, this is all if you're going off of that 8 o'clock time frame. Then the owner of the van called the tow truck company, and then he left from Bridgewater at 8, which puts him there around 8:17. Something that you guys are going to hear in the next episode is 8:12 becomes important, because that is a swipe that happens with Officer Nime's swipe card. There's different areas to check in around Linn-Mar at the time, and you could swipe your card. Now, just because a card was swiped doesn't mean that Officer Nime did the swiping. So we'll get to that. But so then you have to go back and you have to remember the order that these officers said they did stuff. And it is impossible for when it's basically impossible for what the cops have said to had happened if the guys in the van are being honest about talking to Officer Nime and asking them to pop the lock. And it was just right before 8, when at the same time the police officers are saying they can't find Nime. Well, what are you talking about? This gentleman went right down to the substation, knocked on the door. He's right there, answers the door. And this would have been at the same time that these gentlemen are claiming that they went to the substation and he wasn't there. And they tried to radio him and he wasn't there. Now, I'm trying to look at your guys' questions. All right, let me scroll back up here. Again, welcome everybody. Hello, mods. I lived by the cemetery and the White Houses where this happened was below me. Yes. So there you go, Kim. Kim can answer this. The cemetery is a, it's totally the opposite direction and it's not close. Like you have to, if you're driving it, you have to snake it all the way up there. I'm 51 and Jimmy was my age. Robert's a few years older than me and Young same age. So, I want you guys to see something here. You know what, I can do it. I'll do it like this. Hold on one second. Don't worry, I'm still here, y'all. Just gonna pull up something I think you guys will appreciate if I can do it. Okay. Okay. All right. So between right here, it's down right over there. Back over there was where Officer 9 was. And I'm trying to see if I can get an angle to, okay, yeah, when you see all the different numbers, that's how close the doors are, okay? But you're able to park. You see how people park in this parking that's going to be several spaces, see like that. Like that. So those were those little dips that you see. That's going to be that area here, 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 here. Those are those dips. So where you see these little stars, right there, your scan-in strip. So if you see an X, that's where your swipe would happen. Okay, so right here is where they're trying to get the car unlocked, or the van rather unlocked. All right, 297, 298, 299, 293. So right there is the apartments where These gentlemen had dropped off with the van issues. You just walk back through there like that. But here's where the van would have been. Here's your community building. And then right behind it is the basketball courts. Okay. And if there was anybody that was going to be in the middle of the street, anybody crying and screaming, that would have been like, you know, right here, because it has to be in their eye view, over here to over here. Now the angle and what they try to claim is that, again, here's the basketball court, and that you can actually see over this way. I've done it. I'll put up some angles, I think. If I pull up my other YouTube videos, I'll post them. But in the pitch black, if you think that you're going to be able to see from here to here, in pitch black, where the officers admit that they had to have their flashlights out, okay? You're not seeing things in pitch black when you're looking up. Now, there are lights that light up around, okay? But like you heard the officers say, they had to, quote unquote, they had their, you know, flashlights. And that's how they found, when they were scanning the area, they were able to find that big lump, they said. So I want you to take a look here. If you're right here, this is your apartment, and you're right here, and somebody, like, say, running, these guys said they didn't see anything before or after. They didn't see people running around or nothing. And this is the way that they're claiming that to run, is that it was behind the apartments and off into the woods down to Green Street. Green Street went that way. All through in the middle of here, this is all like green space. I'll go back over here, so just to give you guys kind of an idea what that green space is like. See in the middle of these, see this big tree right here? Right behind that, that's going to be one of those big trees. There's two big trees. This is the one that they talked about, because that was the big tree that was by the substation. Trying to go to the eye view. Let's see. While I'm doing that, what questions do you guys have for me so far? Ooh. So, this is what these officers want me to believe. They just miraculously all ended up at the same place at the same time. And that Officer Naim actually radioed for them. But rather than Cassidy just answering a radio call over the radio, we'll just go see him instead. Okay. And that this van has their keys locked in the car. They're able to walk down, talk to Officer Naim, no problem. Well, with the exception that they think that the door wasn't opened all the way, and they make note of it to at least to like say that it was only partially opened. And you guys know what that's like when you just like kind of reach out and you're like, hey, what's up? Like you don't let somebody in and you don't go all the way out. So, okay. But they're saying that interaction happened. Now, was it actually Officer Naim that was the person that did it? Was somebody else inside that room talking? But Robert says that when he gets up there, that he makes a loop looking for him, because he said that the officers had already radioed in and said they couldn't locate him because they had blown the air horn. So this would be the order then that this happened. Cassidy and Young go, they get there between 7:47 and 7:50. Enough the fact that they blew the air horn, he didn't answer. They radioed, he didn't answer. So then they decided to loop in the circle. Now check this out. How could there have been shots fired? Because make this circle to talk to a juvenile that says shots have been fired if it was in fact 7:55 and the guys in the van are saying that they went and saw Officer Naim and he was alive. But this juvenile male says that shots fired and sending them to the cemetery at 7:55, but at 8 o'clock, or just before, this gentleman walks down, knocks on the substation door, and Officer Naim is alive, telling him, no, we can't get into your vehicle. We don't do that anymore. Okay, and then the other thing that goes with that is, well, first of all, right there, how is Cassidy, who is Cassidy and Young saying that this juvenile male approached them and said, yeah, we heard, yeah, gunshots were fired and it came from the cemetery at 7:55. In the police reports, the juvenile wasn't identified, but in the police reports that I will, start ripping off are going to be, that's going to be the likes of juvenile named Matt, which the only part that comes up in Cassidy's report that leads to finding the body would be saying that making the rounds, we drove through the area and continued to call him via radio. We drove to the parking lot of the community building. At that time, a male juvenile approached our car and told us he had heard gunshots in the area of the cemetery. Nobody ever said this, but this is what he's writing. And then therefore, okay, that they then drove to the cemetery, okay? But that's also the time that they supposedly tell Officer Roberts, because it went over the speakers with the radio, that there had been gunshots heard or fired in Linn-Mar. Now, if you ask the guys in the van, they say that they talked to Officer Naim, and it wasn't for 15 minutes after that, which puts it at 8:15, that the gunshots were actually shot off. And that the body was then found way quicker than they're trying to allude, which makes way more sense. Because this order didn't happen. And I'm proving it right here. So, again, they're saying that a male juvenile, again, just before 8 o'clock, is telling them that gunshots had been fired. But here you have these witnesses that actually give their statements 2 months later, because I don't think they were, approached, God knows what, or if they pulled a Colorado and submitted just typing it up late. I have to look into that part a little bit more, but at the end of the day, they said Officer Young and Cassie said that they go up to the cemetery, nothing's there. Do you know how long it would take to technically swoop the cemetery? This cemetery is huge, and if you're really looking for somebody that's up there shooting or like something, bad happened, I mean, don't you think you'd be kind of looking? But none of this happened, but we're going to go ahead and let them tell us that this happened. So they go up to the cemetery, then they proceed to check the cemetery, and they alerted other units via radio of the situation. This is when they claimed that then Sergeant Roberts was at this time checking the 500 block of Linn-Mar at this time. While checking the cemetery, we continued to try to raise Officer Naim. via the radio. We found nothing in the cemetery, and then so therefore we went back to the community center. At this time at the community center, we were approached by another juvenile who stated she had heard shots by the cemetery. At this point, these two officers then decided to get out of the vehicle, and Sergeant Cassidy got out of the vehicle to check the wood line behind the community building. As we walked the field behind the community building, that's where the basketball courts are. That's when they're saying that they looked back towards the apartments, which you can't, wait till you see the video I post about it. And that's when they noticed that this large, bulking object lying on the ground. Then Sergeant and himself, they went to go check it out, and that's when they found out that that was Officer Nime laying face down on the ground. Mind you that they had their flashlights. Now, let's back this all up. So when Roberts is at the 500 block, after he leaves the 500 block, he then goes to the Linn-Mar Market, to the store. And he says that he thought the victim may have gone to Linn-Mar Market for a coffee. So he drove over to that location. He checked the store and did not locate the victim. He advised that when he came out, he saw LaToya King, and she said that she was the one who knew about the shots being fired. She advised that she had been over by the playground with some of her friends. She told him that she was with her friends and somebody was shooting towards them. This is the female juvenile that is saying the gunshots weren't coming from any type of cemetery. Okay? No one has ever said that. They were coming from the area of the actual crime scene. Everyone's statements are going to line up with that, as you will see. But it was at this time that he claims that as he is, at this market, that he hears the call go out for Officer Down, and he left the store and headed back up to the scene. So Officer Roberts is claiming in his report that he was down by Linn-Mar Market when the call over the radio came out, Officer Down. And that's when he went up to the scene, right? Well, let's go back to were the cops in Linn-Mar during the shots? And the answer is yes. With the exception of possibly, maybe, not Officer Roberts. Because as he's saying that the reason that he went up there is because he heard on the radio that they were trying to find Officer Nyman and that they couldn't. So what that means is that puts Officer Young and Cassidy up in Linn-Mar, as well as Officer Carter in Linn-Mar at the substation, just yards away from where this murder took place. None of them seeing anything in their reports. Their reports are the most vague things you could ever imagine. There's no timestamps, there's no nothing. Except the just before 8 o'clock. Just before 8 o'clock. Okay, well, just before 8 o'clock, we have a witness that talked to Officer Nime, and you're saying that just before 8 o'clock, someone's letting you know that there was just gunshots. And when I talked to Tiki, he said the cops were up there when there was gunshots. Leanna, have you talked to Sammy and Jerry, who own Plan 12 Market, aka at the time Linn-Mar Market? No, I haven't, but I would love to. Yeah, all of them there at the same time. Yeah, none of them saw each other. So let's just go for simple math here. any way you want to slice and dice this, the gentleman that said that he knocked on the door hears and talks to Officer Nime. Then he says, yeah, about 15 minutes after I had talked to him, that's when we heard the gunshots. And then, and they're claiming that that's when the unmarked vehicle came by, but not before the fact that there was officers at the substation with their cars parked. The fuck is that? I think I just caught a moth. So, and then you have to go look at the timestamp of, like, this is what they're claiming that they did, guys, after hearing shots fired. They're saying that they went to the cemetery. They went up there was nothing there. Then they came back, but all the while, Officer Roberts is, circling around. And supposedly all these people, after the gunshots happen, are, like, running around and... then you would have had, supposedly, Darnell Hines is running. All these people are running. And if you ask actually the people that were there, it isn't until they see these reports that they never said they wrote, and they're like, what is this? So... And then you actually use the mathematical skills, and to get from Bridgewater to Aliquippa, it's 17 minutes. Now, could it have been 7:45? Did he walk down and talk to Officer Nime? Sure. I want to know why the van would be able to just leave up out of there. Not only the van, but then the Bridgewater fire truck department, like that truck. If it in fact, it became a crime scene and it was swarming with cops at 8:20. How would you not be writing about that, or when you're being interviewed, talk about that? Oh God, yeah, we're popping this lock. The next thing we know, all these cops are coming up. There was no mention of anything like that. They weren't letting anybody leave, because that's what started happening, is that they weren't letting people leave. So what that tells me is that the van people were out of there before the body was found. Makes sense? And if the cops were up there earlier than they're saying that they were, because the people in the van all saw the cops. So if they're there earlier, so are the cops. Make sense? But why is this timeline so important? Because they got a hold of Jamie Brown's cell phone records, and they needed to place this happening at that things started happening at a certain time. But that's all gonna come. If they had cameras, I think there's a lot of things that didn't make it into the courtroom that should have, and that hopefully will one day, or that, you know, they just let him go. But no, Kim, I would love to talk to Sammy and Jerry. Sounds like a good time. What would be awesome is that those medical records have a discharge timestamp on it, and then quite possibly, you know, this service place still has and is up running in Aliquippa. You never know. People hang on to their records for a long time. If they were using computers back then, to know what time that actual call went out for the service tow truck. And again, I'm dotting my I's, crossing my T's. And right now, it's a huge question mark: is the cop that this gentleman talked to, was it Officer Nime? How did they determine that it was Officer Nime versus just saying, I went down to the substation, I talked to an officer? Where did it become if they put, I talked to Officer Nime? Does this person know him? Is it the person that, you know? Because unless you live there, I don't think that you're going to know these police officers by name, unless you live there, in my opinion. But the big part from episode 1 to episode 2 that you should be taking away from this is the timeline of events. That if you go based off of what these people are saying and you're taking it for what they're saying, you're putting the police all at the same place at the same time. But more importantly, you're putting Officer Nime being talked to at 8 o'clock, and the gunshots were at 7:55. If and in fact everything that you want to say that they're saying is money. Which, in the order of everything happening, when the van's trying to be opened, is when they see Roberts with the unmarked vehicle, and that was before he ever goes to the 500 block, before he goes to the store and talks to LaToya, and then hearing, you know, officer down. But when the guy that owns the van is coming up the hill and turning, he sees 2 marked cop vehicles. And then when he gets to the guys, they said, oh yeah, just before you got here, a couple minutes before you got here, we heard gunshots. That's the order that they're saying. But then that doesn't make sense with Robert's timestamp of 8 o'clock. We went down there and we saw Nime. We talked to him. So why couldn't Cassidy or Young or Sonia Carter, why didn't anybody see Nime? It's because there was no call for shots fired. If you heard shots fired, I mean, does anybody not use their sirens anymore? I mean, is that just not a thing? Shots fired, someone's on the loose with a gun. I mean, what the fuck? What's going on here? There was no call in for shots fired. That's what Officer Roberts said. Well, you would think, okay, wouldn't people be hysterical? I mean, the guy in the van is claiming that there was a girl screaming in the middle of the road saying, oh my God, and they're just continuing on their day popping locks. I mean, you just hear 5 gunshots, boom, 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 but you swear to God you don't see anything, and you're literally right there. You don't see anybody running, you don't see anybody going the back way. Okay, it's because nobody went that way. You say you don't see a cop up until that point, and then you see a cop, you know, coming. You claim that you just talked to Officer Nime, and then 15 minutes later, You hear the gunshots. Once again, who radios somebody in? Hey, this is Unit 515. 512, are you there? Ignores them and just says, we're just going to go drive to where they are. How do you know where they're at? If this is a person that's patrolling on foot as part of their duty. Like, and then when you go to the substation, you blow an air horn, which nobody talks about in their witness statement. Someone blowing an air horn. And then, okay, he doesn't come out. What if he was using the bathroom? Who doesn't go in if you're looking for somebody? Oh, we blew the air horn. He still didn't come out. We radioed him. He didn't come out. So let me get this straight. At 7:55, right before 8 o'clock, are you saying that Officer Nime's dead at that point? Because then who swiped his card at 8:12? Which we're going to get into that with episode 3. I don't know how this timeline wasn't completely shredded. And the guy in the van was able to talk to Officer Nime, but all these cops that are looking for him can't find him because he's playing hide and go seek with himself. Because he was still alive. But then the guy said up top with the van that after they talked to Officer Nime, 15 minutes later is when they heard the shots. It was right before the dude arrives that owns the van. Okay. And that's why I'm pushing all of that up. It was before 8 o'clock. Because I don't think they would have gotten out of there. Because remember, the guy that owned the van, when he arrives from Bridgewater, he said he had to wait because the service guy wasn't there yet. So if he got there at 8:17, and then the service guy's getting there in the Suburban at 8:20, and then, I mean, you got to think it's going to just take a couple minutes at least, pop this lock, sign some paperwork, get paid. Maybe as quick as you think this is going to happen. I still think it's going to take at least 10 minutes, which puts you at 8:30, which puts you, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, or 12 people already that are police or EMS or fire already up there. Hopewell. And then you look at the statements of when they said they actually left the hospital between 7 and 7:30. That makes more sense that if they left between 7 and 7:30, we got to bump up that time. That's what makes more sense to me. But then I thought maybe it is what they said. And then the only way that's possible is if there was no call in for shots fired. Which again makes more sense because those kids never said that shots were fired and coming from the cemetery. Nobody said that. Not a single soul. So you just can't have it both ways. And then how could you not find him? If you're looking for him and you're up in Linmar and you're radioing him. So that would mean if you're radioing him because you can't find him but he just radioed you at 7:45, you said. And then you just said, oh, we're just gonna go there. And so does Officer Roberts. But then he's nowhere to be found. Let's just tell everybody that we couldn't find him. Interesting. I wish I had my scanner then. I think the more that I start showing this timeline of, in fact, episode 3, Mojo, you know, who is this CI and where does he come into play as far as the timeline goes? And that's just going to be like, if you guys are like wowed right now, episode 3 brings in a couple more people to fill some gaps with the timeline. And when I say fill gaps, it's more like blows it up, but it basically puts your CI and 5 cops at the same place at the same time on who is trying to pin this on Jamie Brown. What? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And the question is why? Sonia Carter was at the substation at 7:45, between 7:15 and 7:45. She's nowhere to be found on the entering in the crime scene, but yet she is in an interview at 3 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the morning with Darnell Hines at 3/16, technically, because it becomes that day, 3 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the morning. She was in on that interview with Darnell Hines and another officer. Oh, and let's not forget, coming up in episode 3 is what was all at the crime scene. And one of the things that was there, I'll leave you guys with the cliffhanger, is Dan Cassidy's checkbook, and his checkbook and stamps was under the body of Officer 9. What? Yes, so. Woo! Woo! Lana, no way. Yes way. Yes. Yes way. So, any questions? And I do want to say this to everybody that watches out there in Alcrippa. I think your whole life growing up, you may have thought somebody was a rat or snitch or whatever term you want to use. I think this podcast is going to tell you the truth about things, and I think people out there got a raw deal with being labeled something, and they were simply not that. Because the police can tell you guys whatever they want, and they could paint any picture that they want. And so, this is not made up stuff. This is coming straight from where it should come from, but you guys just never seen it, never, you know, you give a police report, or someone takes your police report and you tell them everything you know, and you think that they're writing down everything that you're saying, but you don't know unless you get that report. So to this day, anybody that's ever been interviewed with this case, they have no idea what probably is even in there about them, let alone you have no idea what other people have said. But I think that the whole purpose of this podcast is, you know, when you hear of something that brings up your name, pay attention to it. And if it's not something that you ever said or did or whatever, do something about it. Also, if you haven't come forward yet and you know something, it's never too late. I feel bad for yeah, absolutely. Well, and it was very strategic on how they did it, though. It wasn't them arresting him and doing what they did to him was so that they could get him to do what they wanted him to do. which was essentially, he didn't want to lie. He didn't want to tell not the truth. But when you're beaten and you're said people say things to you, you'll see it gets a lot worse of what happened to the people that were involved in this case in terms of just being there. Sad. And then you just got to ask yourselves this, is if police officers are truly trying to find somebody that killed a police officer, you just follow the evidence. You don't need to do anything other than get the statements, do the investigation. With the amount of police officers up there, you're telling me none of the police officers saw anybody? But they're claiming that, no, because we weren't up there when the gunshots happened. Yeah, you were. I'm going to prove it. Stephen will make sure that you get a copy of one of my playlists. That's funny. Kim, I knew you'd like that. See, there's a lot of stuff that people don't know, and people need to know this, but why would Officer Cassidy's checkbook and stamps, when you have your checkbook and you have your bunch of your stamps in there when it folds up, why would that be in the crime scene? Crazy. I got more for you. Boston, yes, it's very sad. You guys want another spoiler? I'll give you another spoiler. And a spoiler here is that another cop makes their appearance in Linmar. Officer by the name of Officer Sealock will be seen as well up in Linmar before the death of Officer 9, right before. Again, guys, we're just getting started with putting the people down that we've come across. So, Tiki, Shushu. We're going to get into Matt and LaToya here in these episodes. Marcus as well. We placed on the map Darnell Hines. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more to come from Darnell. Tiger, Miss Carrie, that's the one that puts Officer Edgel up in Linmar at the markets. You guys are going to be finding out Mojo, the CI. And yeah. But probably that's why this case is just so, got to break it down and go slow, because it's very overwhelming because there's so many people. And who's related to who and who knows who lives together. But it's crazy. This is where it all starts. And even a little bit before this, but this was the big daddy that needed a big cover up, and it just has continued on in Beaver. So Beaver's a bad, he's a bad bitch, Beaver. Beaver's a bad bitch. All right, guys, if you guys don't have any more questions, or I knew Kim would like that. Oh my, shaking my head. Yeah, it's crazy. But these timestamps, as we continue on, and when we start placing people, like, you know, like I said, there was a saying of Derek, he's on here. I'm trying to keep names to just a first name basis. I'm not trying to put people out there. But I'm hoping people that are my age, that were, you know, 18 to 22 at the time, and now they're my age, and they have a memory back then, and obviously they were old enough to know what was going on, and they hear this. I'm hoping that if there's people out there that come forward if they hear different parts, that would be awesome, because I know there's people out there that know things. And I think Jamie has served 20 years too much, and I think that if the right people come forward, I think Jamie can come home. So just keep that in mind. It's never too late to do the wrong thing or the right thing. All right, guys, you guys take care. Hopefully that helped you guys connect the dots, which is saying right now it is impossible that the Elko Police Department did not find James Nyman at 8 o'clock or just before 8 o'clock, but the guy that needed to get in his van was able to talk to him. So something isn't adding up there. And that's where you have your first glitch of the time frame, of the timeline. So take care, and I'll see you soon next Sunday, or this Sunday, however you look at it. Mods, love ya.